just want to start by sharing a little bit of what the last month has been like for myself as an HESN volunteer. On cold alert evenings, I have been going out with other volunteers to check in on people, to see if folks have what they need to survive the night, to bring supplies. And there are several things that I've noticed as I've been out. One of those things is that there are no city staff anywhere to be found. It's just us out there and unhoused folks. And other things that I've noticed are that shelters are full. There are people sleeping on the sidewalk in alcoves, people using the warming centers, which I'm very grateful is an option for them. But people do not have the necessary supplies to survive nights outside. And the reason why some people are outside, I think is really complicated and complex, but there are a few issues with the warming centers. There's a very, very complicated schedule. I had a phone that was fully charged with data, and it took me quite a while to be able to provide the information to folks who were out, to be able to tell them what was open when and how to get there. And then once we were able to figure that out together, they were asking questions about, can I go if I've been exposed to COVID? The shelter that I was staying at last night has an outbreak. I have COVID. Can I still go? Will my partner and I be put into separate areas? And I had none of that information. Upon calling the warming centers and the number that the city continues to provide online, there were no responses. There was no one to speak to. And so we needed to drive to the warming center at Bonetto in order to get the answers for folks. It's about a 10 block walk for most people. And you have to understand that on this kind of night, I'm in full winter gear, and I couldn't feel my toes after a while of being out with folks. It was hard to think straight after a while of being out in such severe cold. So to assume that someone can walk 10 blocks and maybe be turned away from the place where they're going to get warm is an unreasonable ask. The people that I met are still in my mind. I'm thinking about how overwhelming the number of mentally ill folks was that I met. And as someone who's MAT identifying, I just found it really heartbreaking and extremely painful how many folks I was talking to who I knew would probably get asked to leave the warming centers because they would have a problem behaving in a way that would be considered acceptable in those spaces. I came across a couple who was newly evicted with all their possessions pulling out of an Uber, and they were trying to find a place to stack their things so that they could survive the night. I came across a woman who was so cold that I had to slip gloves onto her hands, which were blue, and she could not stand up to walk to the warming center, which was 2 blocks away because she was so cold. This is not acceptable. We are not budgeting to care for all. I have found this metaphor helpful in thinking about how I would approach you in speaking about the budget, being that I'm sure we've all made a household budget before. You've got your expenses, your essentials, and then you sort through that. So you make sure that your rent is paid or your mortgage. You make sure that you'll have running water, heat, food in the fridge, meds, etc. And once everyone in the household has what they need to survive, then you get the extras. You don't get the fun stuff until you get the things that you need to get by. When you were elected, this city became your household. Currently, the essentials are not being covered in your household. People in this household are not okay. They are dying. But we keep sprucing up the place and hosting sporting events and talking about development and getting nice parks and taking care of the neighborhoods where the middle class and the wealthy live. And yet there's people whose hands are so cold that they can't even pull a blanket onto themselves, so I need to tuck them in. I hope you can understand the emotion in my voice, because this is not okay. It's not. And if you don't see the need to budget like this is an emergency, which it is, I would like to challenge you to go out on a cold alert night, not as a councillor going to talk to constituents, not as a politician looking to gain favor in the public eye. As a human being and as a neighbor, go out and speak to unhoused folks. I would hope, and I am curious to know whether you would begin to understand the urgency with which HESN volunteers have been coming to you. I hope that you would consider the way that you have mocked us and criminalized us in our urgency and called us naive and said that we have been unnecessarily standing with our unhoused neighbors. And I am curious if you would be able to say that after an evening out talking to people.
Thank you, Joanna. Joanna, it's your 5 minutes.
Okay, I have a closing statement. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Your decision with this budget can mean life or death for people. Your house needs to be taken care of. The people here need to be taken care of. And I am begging you to please budget accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I believe I heard her indicate that she had tried to reach out by phone to get staff. Can I just get elaboration as to what transpired, Deputy Mayor?
Joanna?
Of course. So we called the number that we found online for the Bonetto Rec Center, and there was no response at that number. There was a message, I believe, that said that it was quite an old voicemail recording. When I called the number that had been posted on, I believe it was the Facebook page of Hamilton City Council, possibly Nrinder Nan posted it for Ward 3, which is my ward. And there was either no response. When I called it the next day to just see, like, is this phone line actually functioning? I did speak to someone. They directed me to the warming center and to the shelter. And when I told them that I was looking for information on the warming center, they told me that they didn't have any further information about it, that they just could tell me to go there and provide me with the address. And then in directing me to the shelters, I said, do you know if the shelters are full? And the person said, yes, they are full. Yeah.
Councillor?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. If I may follow up with a question to Joanna. I understand that you have been providing assistance to folks who are houseless or unhoused. And I'm not asking you to speak for them, but do you have at least anecdotal information as to why there is the trepidation to go to a shelter?
Yeah.
If you don't.
Yeah, of course. I just cut me off if I'm talking too long, because I honestly have so many stories from different people. So in particular this summer, there was a couple. They were not able to find shelter space or hotel space together. There was shelter space for the gentleman, not for his partner. He did not want to leave her out on the street for the night, as I'm sure everyone here can understand.
Yes.
So he opted not to take the permission to go to the shelter. There was someone who was evicted from their apartment and were trying to get back into housing. They had all of their possessions with them that they had been storing in a tent, all the possessions that they were able to carry. Had they opted to take the shelter space, they would have had to leave those possessions to get trashed and then start from scratch if they were going to move into an apartment in the future. So
they're
no,
not permitted. They're not. Sorry, Madam Deputy Mayor. So they're not permitted to take their belongings with them into a shelter. Is that what you understand?
from what I understand, there is a limit of maybe 1 or 2 bags.
Interesting.
I believe there may be one shelter that offers a small storage locker. The space there is quite often full, and it is not a shelter for women, as far as I'm aware. I'm not 100% sure on these details though, so I would ask that you look into that.
No, yeah, and that's why I'm asking, Madam Deputy Mayor. I hear the stories, and we don't get the opportunity to speak to the allies who are out there. And I've heard about violence directly from the homeless. Assisted in the summer on Ferguson Avenue handing out sandwiches. And so some of the discussions we had were they don't want to go to the shelters. And that troubles me, because if they're choosing to stay outside in the cold and risk their life, then what's going on in the shelters that would scare them so much that they wouldn't want to go there? And that's something that's been gnawing at me for a long time, and I still don't have an answer to it. So I didn't mean to put you on the spot, Joanna, but since you are here, I thought I'd ask that question for the record. Thank you very much for attending today. I do sincerely appreciate it. My apologies, Deputy Mayor, for taking up so much time.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And thank you, Joanna. I don't see any other speakers, so thank you for coming and taking your time to share with us. And if you will turn your video off and leave the meeting, you can continue on YouTube.